I'll now be going through the methods section of the laboratory report. It's very important that when you listen to these instructions that you've got your marking rubric in hand, so you can follow along and help understand what each of the components are. So the first thing we need to do is address all the elements to avoid that fail. So what do I need to do to pass? Put a number of different elements straight up. First thing we need to do is we need some participant information. Now, in the example you see in front of you here, it's got 10 5-male, 5-female students from the Australian College of Physical Education volunteered to participate in this study. Prior to the commencement, and it's got a little bit of information, around sort of ethics, and they were fully informed. You don't need to have one that looks like this, and you don't need to have or write a comment of ethics. This is just one example that someone used in their report. What you do need to do is explain to the reader who your subjects were without using names, so essentially in third person. Many of the experiments you'll be doing have just used either one or two people. So examples here you might have, one male student participates in regular soccer activities on the weekend, or two female dancers, All you're trying to do, you might put some average ages in there, you might describe weight or height or anything. What you're trying to do is establish people that you used in this study with comparison to the literature, which is what we're going to do later. If you did the same experiment and you got different results, maybe it's the people you used. So the idea here is that we're explaining who we used. The second thing we need to address is the equipment used. This one here looks a little complex when you read it like this. Again, this may not apply to you at all. You just need to say the equipment that you used. If you used a special machine, you might say that. This one here is on a computer. They've got some computer details put in there. Maybe using a bat, a ball, maybe some cones. Whatever you used, you're writing down what you used in this experiment. The idea is that someone else comes along and they want to replicate the experiment. They know what equipment that you had. The third thing is we need to examine the experimental protocol, or we need to essentially write down what we did. This is the idea. The idea is, we're writing down essentially the steps of the experiment. So, and the final thing is we need to address the ACP Scientific Style Guide for Language. The two important parts of this language style guide is that it says, number one, we need to use third person, and secondly, we need to use past tense. So the third person means there's no I, you, me. It's like each subject. Essentially, you're pretending that you didn't do the experiment, even though in many cases you did. So the participants did this. Each subject was asked this. It's all talking about, it's like you're a fly on the wall watching yourself do the experiment. You're referring to the person as a subject or a participant, something along those lines. Secondly is the past tense component. It's a real key feature because when you're reading your laboratory, your lab books, remember that the experiments aren't written in past tense. They're written like you're going to do it. So the book that you're reading will essentially say something like, you will do this, or you will be required to do that. In this lab report, remembering you've already done the experiment, you need to write it like it's already been done. So each subject was told. They've already been told. It's already been done. The experiment required. It doesn't requires, it required because you've already done it. So they're the two key parts of your third person and your past tense. They're two of the real keys for that scientific style guide for language. Moving up to the credit pass box, we need supporting materials which help to add to the procedural detail. Things like pictures and diagrams here are really useful. So here's an example of just the signals or the lights with the keyboards underneath. It's going to look very different in a lot of different experiments. The key component here is that you're helping show the reader what the experiment actually looked like. Remember that every time you include a figure, a picture, a table of any description, they need to consistently meet the style guide for presentation of the tables and figures. And again, to remind you, that style guide reads, figures are labeled below, tables are labeled above. The first component, so figure 1 in this example, is in bold. The rest of the statement is in non-bold. Also, every time you have a picture or an image of any description, you're always referring to it in text. And here we've got the example of C figure 1. Where it says consistently meets APA style guide for presentation language, it means if for some reason you missed one of these or made a little mistake in one, but generally you were doing it well, you certainly wouldn't fail, but it would prevent you from obtaining any higher than a credit. Same goes for where it says consistently meets APA style guide for language. If you predominantly did it correctly, but occasionally there's a mistake in there, again, you wouldn't fail for it, but it would prevent you from getting any higher than that credit. Moving up into the high distinction and distinction columns, it's got comprehensive methodology written in paragraph format, no dot points. And that means it can't even read like it's a pile of dot points stuck together. It needs to read like normal text. So taking into account that when you're normally going through an experimental protocol, it'll say step 1, then next thing, then next thing, then next thing. Even if you delete all the numbers and jam them up on each other, it needs to read like a paragraph, read like a body of writing. All the elements in order to achieve this need to be there. So if you just say miss something that's a critical part of the experimental protocol, probably wouldn't fail for it. But if the person couldn't repeat the experiment, then you wouldn't be getting a high distinction for this particular section. Final statement there says justified methodology selected using a research-based evidence. Essentially, this first statement, the experimental protocol used in the study was similar to other previous Higgs law computer-based experiments. And then I've got a reference placed in there. What that's saying is that I didn't just decide out of nowhere and make up this complete experiment that's based on nothing. What I'm saying is that the experiment that I'm using in some way has been validated in other research, at least a similar study. The idea is that a reader would come along and read this and say, okay, well, this is an accepted way or method for examining whatever we're trying to examine. So it's very important that you have a reference in there for the upper superior level of the methodology section.